Well, let me be the first to wish you all a very happy Star Wars Day. Now, you may not be aware of the growing momentum behind this holiday. It's kind of growing nationally right now. There's a lot of movement behind this unofficial holiday that is Star Wars Day. Now, it's not quite a national holiday just yet. I see you guys are looking very excited. The church is still going to be open tomorrow. Yeah, the church will still be open. It's not federally recognized, but it started back in 2001, or 2011, I'm sorry. 2011, when a group of Star Wars fans realized the obvious pun, "May the 4th be with you." Yeah. And so they came together on May the 4th to celebrate the film franchise that they love so much. And I admit, I am a fan of Star Wars. I love those movies. I'm more of a Star Wars fan than a Star Trek fan, so I know I've alienated several of you by saying that, but that's okay. I'm not such a big fan, though, that I have the Stormtrooper costume in my closet or anything like that. I just really enjoy these movies. I love the story of this farm boy and how he goes from being a farm boy to being a Jedi Knight and saves his galaxy. I love how he discovers this connection to an ancient power that flows through him. And then he sets out on this journey to realize that power and to bring it into the truth of what he is. You know, it's interesting. I was looking at the history of this idea of the Force, and it's easy to find spiritual parallels in the Star Wars universe. They run through the whole thing. And the most obvious one is this idea of the Force. And so I looked at was George Lucas really conscious of how closely this idea of the Force relates to our concept of God and the Christ presence? And he was. He actually said that the idea was inspired across 13,000 years of human history. And this concept that we all kept discussing about this presence that moves behind us and around us in everything that we do. Now, he actually got his inspiration from a film. And I'm going to share a quote from that with you. It's a very obscure movie from the 70s called 2187. And in this movie, it's two men, and they're arguing back and forth about the nature of mankind. And you have one man who's arguing that humanity, we're just like machines, that we just function like a machine does, that everything just kind of works because that's how the machine works. And then the other one is arguing for something different. And he says, many people feel that in the contemplation of nature and in communication with other living things, they become aware of some kind of force or something behind this apparent mask that we see in front of us. And they call it God. And from that line came the inspiration for what we know as the Force. That's where Lucas got that from. And you know, as a child growing up in Unity, it seemed pretty apparent to me that this thing that I was learning about, this thing that's called the Christ, this perfect potential that lives within each and every one of us, it related pretty easily to this concept of the Force. This idea of this perfect nature that was flowing through me that I just had to reach out and access and use. And so a lot of times when I would watch the movies and I would hear them say, "May the Force be with you," my Unity biased mind actually heard them say, "May the Christ be with you." Now I admit I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd, and I thought it would be so much fun today that instead of using the word Christ, which you're probably going to hear me use more than that, is the Force. I told my wife, Sarah, I was going to do that, and she just kind of looked at me and said, "You're such a dork." Sorry. So today, if you hear me say the words the Force, just go ahead in your mind, replace it with the Christ. Or with whatever present or term for the presence and the power and the energy of God is that works for you. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this presence and this power of God that flows through us, this force of God, and how we can connect with it and how we can use it to better and to prosper our lives. I also have to admit, I had a whole lot of fun preparing for this talk because it's not often that you get to sit and watch Star Wars movies and take notes and say, I'm working. But I was, it was great. No, I'm working, I'm busy, I can't, and hit play. But as I was watching those movies, and I was going, okay, how can I take this vast entirety of this universe and boil it down to just something for us to take away from? What I really started to focus on was Luke's journey. His journey from realizing that he was connected to this power and this presence, all the way up to the point where he fully realizes his potential as a Jedi. And as I was watching that, I kind of had this thought of, okay, well, he's going through this similar journey that we go through. This journey of realization of our true potential of the force within us. So maybe there are lessons that he learns along the way, things that he learns as he grows into his potential that we can use to help us learn about our potential and to help us grow into our awareness of the force within us. And so as I was thinking about this, I was drawn to that little green guy right there. Now, for those few of you out there who may have never seen a Star Wars movie in your life, if you're like my dad, he's never seen them, he has no desire to see them. And I understand there might be a few of you out there, that's Yoda. And Yoda is Luke's mentor. He's the one that teaches Luke about the ways of the Force, how he can use the Force in his life, and what he needs to do to avoid the dark side of this power. And Yoda says some wise things and provides Luke with some very wise lessons. You know, I think all different denominations and churches, they love to claim their celebrities and say, oh, we've got this person or this person's one of our followers. You know, our Catholic friends have Mel Gibson and our Scientologist friends have Tom Cruise. Well, today I'm claiming Yoda. Yoda is one of ours. Because he does say some very wise things. And those things that he says, they resonate so well with our unity teachings. And so today, explore the wisdom of Yoda, we will. You know, there's a scene in the movie, and this is one of the lessons that Luke learns. His spaceship has crashed, it's in a swamp, and he can't get it out. And so Yoda is teaching him how to use this power within him to raise the spaceship up. And he asks Luke to do it. And Luke says, well, I'll try. And Yoda looks at him, and he's a little abrupt, a little disappointed. He goes, no, do or do not. There is no try. Do or do not. There is no try. And the message that I see in that is that when we decide what spiritual path we want to follow, we make a commitment to following that path. We follow it or we don't. There is no try. No matter what it is that we're committing to doing in our lives, no matter what it is that we're committing to exploring, the importance is that we make that commitment. Now, I don't know about you, but any time in my life when I say I'll try, well, I know the first thing that happens when that obstacle shows up is I go, well, I tried. That's it. There's no need to keep going. I tried. It didn't work. But if I've committed to doing it, well, that's different. Because I've put my intention behind it, just like we have these 12 people who have committed to traveling to Haiti, just like we have Dan and his team for Community Link that have committed to making a difference in the world around us in Kansas City. They've made their commitment and they're going to do it. They're not going to try. They're going to do it. And so we do or we do not, but we no longer try. No longer do we try to meditate every day. No longer do we try to put the spiritual principles we hear about into practice. We do it. Or we don't. But we don't try. And so Yoda teaches us this idea of making a commitment and standing for that commitment and putting the full authority of our power and our presence behind it. Because remember, unity teaches us that the world that we experience, the things we put out into the world, are the intentions we receive back. So when we put our intention forward to do something, we have the full weight of the force behind us to do all that we need to do. Now, once you've committed to doing something, there is something else that has a tendency to pop up from time to time, and that's fear. You know, we make this commitment, okay, I'm going to realize my spiritual potential. And then we become afraid. Because what's going to happen if we fail? What happens if we're not successful? We could experience physical or emotional pain. Oh, that's scary. I better not do that. And we end up holding ourselves back. You know, the way Yoda puts this is he says, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. Hatred leads to suffering. And we see how that happens in our life, right? We receive this guidance to go out and to do something in our world around us. But then that fear shows up and we start going, well, maybe I shouldn't act on that guidance. What if I get hurt? What if it doesn't go the way I want? I better not. I'm too afraid to really step out. But then what we notice is the people around us that took the action that they received from their guidance, well, they begin to achieve success. And we begin to feel angry. Angry at ourselves for not taking the steps we needed to take to do what was ours to do. Sometimes we project that anger out from us, out into the world. And we project it onto those people or those places that we see finding success in areas we wish we would have. And it's not really a far jump from that point before we start to feel that hatred. That kind of self-hatred or that hatred of others who are doing what we really wanted to do. And when we do that, we suffer as a result. And most of the time, the person who's suffering is ourselves. We're the ones that end up suffering from those decisions. And the amazing thing is, that suffering is so easily avoidable. All we have to do is deal with that feeling of fear in the first place. If we can stop that train before it gets out of the station and down that path, that dark side path of the suffering and the hatred and the anger, well, we cut the whole thing off at the pass. And Yoda actually gives us an idea for how we deal with those fears. When he's talking to Luke and he looks at him and he says, named your fears must be, before banishing them you can. And the same is true for all of us. We have to identify what it is that we're afraid of. Otherwise, how do you know what it is to use your affirmations and your denials and to move through you if you don't know what it is that you're afraid of anyway? And one of the ways I like to identify what the real root of that fear is by pretending I'm 3 years old again and asking the question, why? I said, what am I afraid of? Well, I'm afraid I might get hurt. Well, why? And you answer that question and then ask again, why? And you keep asking why until what you find is the exact root of what that fear was in the first place. Maybe it's a fear of loss, or a fear of rejection, or a fear of not being successful. But whatever it is, once you've identified it, well, then you're able to do the work you need to do to release it and to move on. But if we don't identify our fears, we find ourselves just sort of stuck in this place where the same patterns keep presenting themselves over and over and over again. And so we have to name our fears, identify them, and then, and only then, can we confront them and banish them. Now, the most important thing for you to do when you begin to identify these fears is to commit. Commit to confronting and dealing with those fears in your lives. Because remember, you'll either do or do not. Because there is no try when it comes to getting rid of fear. Now, there's one other lesson that Luke learns that I think is really important for our understanding of how we live and work with the world around us. And it's a scene from the second film in the original trilogy, in Empire Strikes Back. And Luke has a trial he's supposed to go on. He's to walk into this cave. and then have the experience of what happens in his cave inform him as he goes on to be a knight. And before he goes into the cave, he asks Yoda, what am I going to find in there? And Yoda looks at him and says, only what you bring in with you. And so Luke walks into the cave. And inside the cave, he's confronted with his own inner demons. They show up in the form of Darth Vader, who comes around the corner. And what Luke realizes is that this image of Darth Vader is actually his own darkness. It's the darkness inside of him, the darkness that he brought with him into that cave, the darkness that will pull him over to the dark side if he doesn't deal with it. And so what do we find in the world around us? Only what we bring in with us. You see, as we look at the world around us, our experience of this world is entirely informed by what we bring to our experience of this world. The reality that we experience around us, it's informed, it's shaded by our perspective on what that reality is. And to give you an example of how this works, I just have you think of a camera. And I'm not talking about like the camera on your phone, but a detachable lens camera. If I were to have one of those cameras up here right now and take a picture of all of you sitting out there looking at me, and then go back and look at it later, the image that I'm looking at on the camera isn't actually you as you're all existing right now, as I'm seeing you right now. The image that I see on that camera is the image as it's been processed through the filter of whatever lens I've put on it. So maybe it's taking out a certain type of light, or maybe it's making a wide angle so I can get everybody. But the filter on that camera informs how the image shows up. Well, we have the same filter within ourselves. It's called our perspective. And so when we look at our reality, what we're actually seeing is our reality that's shaded by our perspective. So if we're, and I know we all know someone like this, if you can think of that person that you know of that's kind of that negative person, that whenever something happens, they're going to find the bad in it. And then you think of somebody who's a positive person. When something happens, the positive is what shows up. It's their perspective that shades that reality. So if you look at the world and you see a lot of sadness and strife and negativity, well, the best way to change that is to begin right here, to change ourselves. You see, remember, it was Mahatma Gandhi that said to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so when we change ourselves and change our perspective, we begin to see more of the blessings of the force as it moves and works in and through the world around us. Now, that doesn't mean that those good things, those blessings of God that you begin to see, that doesn't mean they weren't happening before. What it means is that now your perspective has shifted and you're able to see them in a way that you weren't able to see them before. But it all comes down to our perspective. Because remember, the only thing you experience in this life is what you bring with you to the experience. So how do we change that perspective? You know, there are so many ways to do it. You could start a prayer practice that maybe you hadn't done before. You could work with a prayer chaplain. You could begin attending a class or a workshop. I don't know what'll work for you to change your perspective. It's different for all of us. But the most important thing about changing your perspective is that you commit to doing it. That you make that commitment to change your perspective, to change the way you interact with your world, to change the way that you see the events of the world affecting you, to choose to begin to see the power and presence of the force as it moves through the world around you. But you're the one who has to make that commitment. And remember, when you make it, you do or do not. But you don't just try to change your perspective. It was Charles Fillmore who would often say, just try these principles on. See how they work for you. See if it works or it doesn't work. And so make that commitment to try to change your perspective about whatever it is that you feel needs to shift in your life. You know, the simple truth of the matter is that this power and presence of God, this force that moves in and through us, is available to all of us. Each one of us has this God, this Christ potential, this force within us. That's the simple truth. The simple truth is that we move and relate in unity. We create all of this together. That this underlying presence of God, this force, pervades our galaxy, pervades our universe, and that we are a part of it and it is a part of us. Understanding that is easy. Putting it into practice, that's the difficult part. And so the way we begin to put this stuff into practice is by following the steps that Master Yoda taught us, that this little 2-foot unity minister taught us. We begin to commit to our spiritual path. We do or we do not, but we no longer try. We begin to name those fears when they show up in our lives so that we can deal with them, we can banish them and remove them from affecting our true potential. And we remember always that as we go through life, as we experience life, that the only truth of our experience is what we bring with us. And as we do those things, we begin to realize the true force potential that lives within each and every one of us. And so God bless you all, and may the force be with you.